They say the townsfolk didn't even blink when the lash came down. It was noon when they dragged her through the square, not hiding it, not whispering. Just another punishment for a woman who said no when a man said yes. Lin Yui didn't cry, not even when the third strike broke skin, not even when her own father turned away. But someone else didn't turn. A man standing near the back of the crowd, hat low over tired eyes. A man who'd lost more than he ever dared speak of. A man who'd buried a wife, buried a child, and then buried the parts of himself that used to believe in goodness. Calder Reese hadn't planned to speak up, hadn't planned to take anything or anyone home. But that day, as the town turned cold, he did something no one expected. He stepped forward, and he said, "If no one wants her, I'll take her." Not as a claim, not as a prize, but as someone who couldn't watch one more kind thing be broken in silence. So what happens? When two people, one wounded by cruelty, the other by loss, end up under the same roof, can kindness really be enough? And what does it mean to be chosen after all hope has gone? Stay with us, because the story hasn't even begun to unfold. Would you keep watching to see what happened next? The first time Calder Reese saw her, she wasn't standing. She was curled against the post in front of the general store, a welt still rising beneath her right eye, her dress torn, her hair matted, her hands trembling like they'd forgotten what mercy felt like. No one was helping her. They watched. They passed. They pitied in silence, but no one stepped forward. That morning, Calder had only ridden into town to pick up a sack of oats and post a letter for a neighbor gone to war. He hadn't spoken more than 20 words since breakfast. He hadn't meant to see anything more than dirt and dust and prices gone up again. But then there was her, and the way she didn't look away, not defiant, not pleading, just tired of being seen only when she was in pain. The sheriff called it a private family matter, said the girl had refused a good offer of marriage and got what was coming, said her uncle had rights. But rights don't look like that, not to Calder. He didn't shout, didn't fight. He simply walked past the gawking eyes, unbuckled his coat, and laid it gently over her shoulders. And in a voice that hadn't been used for softness in years, he said, "If you need to stand, I'll wait. If you can't yet, I'll wait longer." He didn't know her name, didn't know what hell she'd crawled through, but he knew the look of someone with nowhere left to run. And maybe that's why he didn't let her go. She didn't speak for 2 days. Calder Reese had helped her into his wagon, not asking if she wanted to go, only if she could bear to sit upright. When she couldn't, he made a space for her to lie down, folded a blanket twice, then once more, like someone used to patching things, but never pretending they were whole. The road back to the ranch was long and mostly quiet. Once a hawk passed overhead. Once she flinched at the sound of the wheel catching a stone. But mostly she was still. At the house, he led her to the room that had belonged to his sister before she died. He didn't tell her that. Just said, "There's light in the mornings here," and left the door open. That night he made stew too thick, too peppered, but she ate it. Slow, careful, like each bite had to earn its place inside her. When she finished, she looked up, not at him, not quite, but toward. And then she whispered hoarse and low, "My name is Lin Yue." That was all. Calder nodded once. "I'm Calder," he said, though she probably already knew. Town folk talked about the rancher who kept to himself, who'd buried too many people and stopped letting the world borrow his voice. She didn't say anything back, but the next morning he found her sitting by the window wrapped in that same old coat. But this time, her eyes followed the light. By the third morning, the silence had changed. Not louder, just fuller, like two people had moved from living beside each other to living within the same stillness. Lin Yue swept the porch with a willow broom, though no one asked her to. Her steps were slow, careful not to split the blisters along her back. Calder had left out the ointment and clean bandages beside a basin the night before. When he saw them missing in the morning, he didn't mention it. In town, folks had started whispering. Not cruel, not yet, just curious. They said she was the girl from the square, and some still lowered their eyes when they passed the whipping post. Others didn't. One morning, Calder came back from the mercantile with a spool of blue thread. It wasn't much, but Lin Yue hadn't owned anything blue in a long time. She didn't take it at first, just stared at it on the table while he busied himself with the stove. Finally, she said, "I'm not your wife." "No," Calder replied. "Not unless you choose to be." She turned back to the window. The sky was overcast. Later that day, she found him repairing the coop. She knelt beside him, holding nails without being asked. And when he glanced over, she whispered, "They would have forced me to marry a man 3 times my age. Said I owed it to the family." Calder said nothing, just slid the hammer toward her handle first. She picked it up, missed the first swing, but the second landed clean. That summer, the rains came late and the soil cracked early, but something else began to soften in the house. Lin Yue no longer flinched when the back door creaked open. She no longer sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap like they might betray her by moving on their own. She had begun sewing again. Not for money, not to survive, but for herself. She took that spool of blue thread and started stitching old linens into small crooked flowers. Calder left her to it, only pausing to ask once softly if she needed more cloth. One evening, Calder returned late from the canyon. His boots were soaked and his hat held the weight of dusk. She met him at the threshold, not with words, but with a cup of warm water and a small towel folded in two. "I fixed the fence," he said. She nodded. "I patched your shirt." And that was all. One afternoon, she stood in the yard in a faded skirt that used to hang loose on her hips. It fit now, not because she'd grown, but because she'd begun to take up space again. The women at the chapel stopped whispering. One or two even nodded. But when one of her old kin passed by in town, her cousin, the one who'd told her, better to be a man's shame than his burden, Lin Yue didn't turn her head. She held her basket steady and walked on sun on her face. That night, Calder brought out his late wife's old chessboard. He didn't say why, just set it on the table and cleared the dust. Lin Yue sat across from him. She didn't know the rules, but she moved the first piece anyway, and Calder smiled. That fall, the cottonwoods turned gold. Lin Yue began rising before dawn, not out of fear, but rhythm. The same kind the wind followed when it came down from the hills. She no longer avoided the mirror by the stairs. Sometimes she even paused before it, tucking loose strands of hair behind her ear, tilting her face toward the light as if to study what had healed and what hadn't. It was Calder who broke the quiet one morning. "I keep thinking," he said softly, "how I never asked why you were out there." That day. She stirred the fire, letting the crackle speak for her. But after a while she replied, "They tried to marry me to a man twice widowed. Said I was lucky to be chosen." I said no. Calder didn't interrupt. "So they made an example. Took me to the square." She turned to him, now not crying, just steady. "No one stopped them. Except you." After, his jaw clenched like it did when he hammered fence posts, but his voice was kind. "I didn't stop them. I just waited till you crossed my land." Lin Yue's eyes softened. "Sometimes that's all someone needs, a place to cross into." They didn't say more, but that night Calder added a new board to the porch railing just beneath where she liked to rest her elbows. She noticed, and touched it once gently, a small private thanks. And somewhere between moonrise and morning, Lin Yue picked up her old name again, quietly, to herself. Winter rode in slow like a dog too old to bark. There was snow in the air, but not yet on the ground when the letter came curled at the edges, bearing the seal of the county judge. Calder opened it at the table. He read it once, twice, then folded it again with quiet fingers and set it down between them like a verdict. "They've issued a summons," he said, not looking up. "The man who tried to marry you, he's pressing claim." Lin Yue didn't flinch. She only reached for the kettle and poured them both tea. "What does he want?" she asked. Calder's voice was low. "You, or restitution?" She nodded once, then let him come. The next week moved slow, stretched out by cold winds and courthouse words. On Thursday, a covered wagon arrived, not with the sheriff, but with the man himself. His name was Marvin Crowder, though no one called him anything to his face. He stepped down in polished boots, a broad coat flaring behind him like pride. He didn't knock, just stood at the gate. "You owe me a woman," he called, "or you owe me land." Calder didn't answer right away. He walked to the porch and rested a hand on the post he'd fixed weeks ago, the one she touched with quiet gratitude. "This land's spoken for," he said. Crowder sneered. "So's the girl." That was when Lin Yue stepped outside. She wasn't dressed for confrontation, just a wool shawl, frayed gloves, boots she'd cleaned herself. But her chin was lifted and her silence louder than any threat. "You don't get to speak for me," she said. Crowder blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "You never did." Behind her, Calder didn't move. Just stood like a tree she could lean against if needed, but didn't. Crowder's eyes darted between them, searching for weakness. Finding none, he spat once in the snow, then turned. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "No," Calder said softly. "We've done enough of that." And as the wagon rolled away into the wind, Lin Yui exhaled, and for the first time in years, the breath didn't taste like shame. Spring didn't arrive with a trumpet. It came with a slow drip from the eaves, a calf's first call in the far barn, the hush of boots on thawed ground. Calder had cleared a path from the cabin to the well with the same care he'd once reserved for fences and tools. But now it felt like a way forward, a small gesture made for two. Inside, the kitchen bore traces of Lin Yui's quiet habits. Herbs hung to dry, a mended cloth draped over the windowsill, warmth that wasn't just from the stove. She wasn't his bride in any legal book. But she cooked beside him, stood beside him, and when she sat across from him at the end of the day, she didn't flinch from silence. She belonged, not because he claimed her, but because she chose to remain. That morning, Calder returned from checking the south line and found her planting early onions in the side bed. Knees in the dirt, sleeves, pushed high hair, caught up by a pin too small to hold all of it. He watched for a long moment, and she, sensing him there, didn't turn. "Just said I reckon this soil was always waiting for something." He nodded. "Most of us are." They didn't speak of Crowder again, or the scars, or the winter that nearly broke them both. Instead, they let the breeze carry stories they no longer had to retell. That evening, as the sun tucked behind the ridge, Calder sat beside her on the porch, 2 cups of tea between them, and no need to fill the space with more than breath. The wind carried birdsong this time, and hope that old companion no longer felt like a stranger. Sometimes the kindest things are the quietest. A man who never meant to open his heart again. A woman who no longer believed she was worth being chosen. And a little piece of land where no one expected a second chance to take root. But that's the miracle of gentleness. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It just stays. In the end, Lin Yue didn't need saving. She only needed a place where her voice was heard even in silence. And Calder Reese didn't need to be needed. He only needed to remember that love, even late, is still love. The world may not have noticed when she stitched a quilt from her old torn dresses, or when he fixed the gate without being asked. But those moments stitched something together far deeper than land or law. And maybe that's what healing looks like, not a grand gesture, but a man and a woman choosing to stay, choosing to look out the same window at the same hills and say, "We're still here." If this story touched you in some quiet way, we'd love to hear from you. Do you believe in second chances even late in life? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us, would you like to hear what comes next? And if you'd like more stories like this, one full of quiet strength and hard-won tenderness, don't forget to subscribe to None, Wild West Saga, and turn on notifications. We're saving a seat for you right here by the fire.